Well, good morning, everybody. It's Thursday, June 22nd. It's the latest in the AWMSG Open Day series. So, good. I hope you're well. We're on the downward spiral from here, so the days, nights are now drawing in. But we have a packed agenda for you today. We have Rosie from AWTTC taking us through latest thoughts on the One Wales medicines process. We have Tom Curran, who's going to describe medicines optimization, latest thoughts on the work of AWTTC. There'll be time for questions. There's a question box, there's a chat box, there's even a slido.com quiz. So hold on to your seats. Before we get going, Steph Francis has a couple of words for us all. So over to you, Steph.
Thank you. Do you mind? I can just move on a slide and to the next one, please. Okay, thanks, Steve. Welcome, everyone. Before I hand over to Rosie and Tom, I just wanted to provide a quick recap on the last session that we held in March, in case some of you weren't able to attend. There we covered a brief overview on market access, and our colleague Tanya Bateman spoke about the commercial access team. So I just wanted to draw your attention to that, because those slides and presentation are available on the AWTTC website. The other thing I wanted to mention was we'd welcome any questions at the end, and also any feedback as a follow-up. We're hoping to plan a session the back end of the year in November, where there'll be more topics and an opportunity to talk more interactively with the team. So any feedback be really welcome. Without saying much more, I'll hand straight over to Rosie to talk about the One Wales process. Thank you.
Thank you, Steph. Hi, I'm Rosie Spears. I'm one of the senior scientists here in AWTTC, and I work on the One Wales process. So if we have the next slide, please. So I'm going to briefly cover in this session who we are, why we have the process, how the process fits in with other routes of access in Wales, who can engage with the process, how it works, industry involvement, and reviews of the process as well. And so if we go on to the next slide and kick off with who we are. We have Gail Woodland, who's actually on the session today and will be available later to answer questions. She's a senior pharmacist and team leader. And then, as I said, there's myself, Catherine Chaplin and Claire Elliott, who are all senior scientists on the team. And we have Carolyn Hughes, Rachel Jonas and Bridget Ann Kenny, who are medical writer scientists. And we have administrative support from Laura Phillips. So that's our team that all work on the One Wales process. If we go on to the next slide, which where we're going to do a little bit of the background of the One Wales process and why we developed it in the first place. So where there's an absence of health technology assessment or HTA advice, the really main other alternative route of access for treatments that aren't routinely funded in NHS Wales is through the individual patient funding request process. And although this is suitable for one-off requests for as it explains, individuals, it's not really appropriate where there are cohorts of patients who have the same clinical presentation and who are, where the same medicine is being requested. And so the problems with this is that it can lead to potentially inequity of access to a certain medicine or treatment if decisions are being made on an individual basis by different panels in different health boards across Wales. So this One Wales process has been developed to enable access where there's an unmet clinical need for a cohort of clearly defined patients. So if we go on to the next slide. This is a kind of like a small snapshot of the larger slide that Steph showed earlier, which gives a little bit of kind of an idea of where we fit in with the other access routes to medicines in Wales. As you're aware, the main access route is through HTA appraisal, either through AWMSG or through NICE. And then, as previously mentioned, we have the IPFR process for those one-off requests for medicines for individual patients. The Early Access to Medicine scheme, which is administered by the MHRA, also applies in Wales. And then there's the free of charge scheme, which acts as a bridge between licence and HTA. And then we also have, as I say, One Wales for these cohorts of defined patients that fall outside of the IPFR process. So if we go on to the next slide, the treatments that requested or go through the One Wales process, they can be either licensed or unlicensed, although it must be said that the majority at the moment are off-label medicines rather than licensed medicines. So if we do consider a licensed medicine through the One Wales process, the advice that comes through the One Wales process is really considered interim to HTA advice, and we would be expecting a submission to AWMSG or NICE for a full HTA appraisal and recommendation in the coming months, usually a year to 2 years post One Wales advice. And so, as I say, the majority of work that comes through One Wales is off-label, and for us to consider it for the process, there must be no licensed medicine that's routinely available that would meet the patient's needs. The medicine is not licensed for the indication of interest, and the requested use of the medicine is outside of the accepted treatment pathway. So that would be outside of the specific sequence of treatments that have been approved by NICE or AWMSG. So if we go on to the next slide. So how we actually choose the medicines for One Wales, it's mainly from intelligence from the service, and it's very much driven by the service. At AWTTC, we do administer the IPFR All Wales database, where all the IPFR requests are added to the database, and we can look at this database to see if there are any emerging cohorts of patients. And so obviously previous to this, that data was kind of in silos within each health board, and so if we've got the All Wales one, we can see if across Wales as a whole there are groups of patients with the similar diseases and requests coming out. We may also get requests from individual IPFR panels who identify any trends that are emerging. The Welsh Health Specialised Services Committee as well can identify medicines and highlight them to us. Chief pharmacists or clinical experts as well may come to us with requests for medicines that they consider suitable for the One Wales process. We do have a medicines request form that's available on the AWTTC website, and if we have a request from, say, a clinician or pharmacist, we ask them to fill this form in, because it gives us all of the information that we require to see if it fits into the criteria and fits into the process before we can't take it forward any further. And it's important for us to point out at this point really that it's not driven by pharmaceutical companies, because we want to make it clear that it's not a substitute for full HTA of licensed medicines. It's really for those that do fall by the wayside. So it's not a kind of a routine process, and it is reserved for these special circumstances. Once we've actually had requests for medicines and we've taken it internally within our team, the work programme is agreed with the AWMSG steering committee, so they have the final say as to whether or not a medicine will or will not proceed through the One Wales medicines process. So if we go on to the next slide, where I'm going to describe the process in a little bit more detail. There are similarities with the HTA process, but it's not, you know, there are also some quite big differences as well. So once we've identified a medicine and cohort of patients, we will initiate the process by sort of contacting the marketing authorization holder, relevant clinician and patient groups, requesting input into the process right from the beginning. The MA holder, we do request them to submit a commercial arrangement if it's applicable. So for a licensed medicine, this would be, we wouldn't be requesting it for off-label use of medicine. And the level of involvement from the MA holder, or the expectation, depends on whether the medicine is licensed or not, which I'll go into in a bit further on. So once we've establish this contact, we internally will perform a literature search and collate all the evidence that's available to prepare the draft evidence status report. And this is the point at which we may highlight some areas of uncertainty, some things that we want to clarify a bit. And so we send the draft report out to the company and to clinicians for further comment and input. Then once we get that back, we finalise the document. And it's at this point that it goes to the One Wales Medicines Assessment Group, who are convened and who actually make the recommendation decision. Now, the OMAG group, there's membership, we have a chair, and then membership is from IPFR panels across health boards in Wales and WISC, so we have representatives from each of the panels. And we also have a health economist, a finance director, ABPI representative, lay member, and a clinical pharmacologist, all on the voting members. And then in addition to that, we have a physician here and a representative from Velindre Trust as well. And so they then make the decision using the information that we provided from the evidence status report. We also have a clinician can attend to the meeting, and we do ask that they do, so they can answer any questions that the committee may have and that the group may have that need clarification on the patient condition or on the way that a medicine may be administered. And also there is opportunity for patient organisation to attend, or a representative to answer questions about the impact of the disease, etc., or on the individual patients. So once the assessment group have actually discussed the medicine and made the recommendation, the final evidence status report and recommendation is forwarded on to the Chief Executive Management Team for Wales, and they're the body at the moment who endorse the One Wales decisions. And once endorsement is received for a One Wales recommendation, then the recommendation is disseminated across the service on the AWTTC website, and also we do share it on, well, it's only just changed actually, but we do have a platform for sharing it with formulary pharmacists so that they can update their formularies accordingly, and also DHCW can add a link to the One Wales advice on our page on the Inform system. So if we go on to the next page now, we've got, this is time for the first couple of questions on the Slido quiz, just to see if there's anybody out there listening. So if we can get the quiz up, please. Here we go. If you use the QR code or the 5-digit code there. Okay, so question number 1. So if the OMAG have a positive One Wales decision, the medicine must be made available within 60 days of the Chief Executive endorsement. Is that true or false? All right, well, we've got a few responses there, so I think we can go on to the next question now. Okay. So a medicine will only be considered through One Wales if there's no routinely funded alternative available. Is that true or false? Okay. Right, I think we can probably move on, and I shall reveal the correct answers. That's interesting. So, okay, so actually the For One Wales decisions, the One Wales decisions aren't actually included within the new treatment fund, and it's the new treatment fund medicines which are approved through HTA processes that must be made available within 60 days of chief executive endorsement. So for One Wales, it's actually false. There is no mandate for them to be put on formulary within 60 days. However, with the chief executive endorsements, the health boards are really asked to ensure that the medicine or medicines are included on their formularies. And yeah, you all got that one right regarding the second question. With the medicine to be considered through One Wales, it's really only processes, is it really only for medicines where there's no routinely funded alternative available. And just for your information, what we consider to be a routinely funded alternative is a medicine that's appraised by NICE or AWMSG and received a positive recommendation, or if it's not been appraised, it's because the appraisal criteria are not met, and it can still be listed on local formularies, and so that's what we consider to be routinely funded. So if we go on to the next slide now, please. Okay, so industry involvement. Now, the industry involvement does differ depending upon whether the medicine is licensed or otherwise, as you could imagine, really. So for licensed medicines, we would be asking the marketing authorization holder to engage in future NICE or AWMSG HTA. So the One Wales will be truly acting as an interim advice to HTA appraisal. And we do ask for a confidential commercial arrangement to be submitted for licensed medicines to be included on the One Wales process. Also, we ask the companies to provide clinical and cost effectiveness evidence and budget impact information. And also for the licensed medicines, it gives the opportunity to develop and use data collection tool, liaise with clinicians to implement data collection and collate outcome data, both for AWTTC and if the reason it's going through One Wales is to enable sort of like real world data to be collected to support the HTA submission, then this is kind of like where the opportunity is given with this bit of time between license and HTA. And also we will put the draft ESR, we send it to the company to make comments on it before it goes for the assessment group. So for unlicensed medicines, the involvement of the market, well, obviously marketing authorization for other indications or whatever is less, there's less involvement required really. However, we do still ask for any clinical or cost effectiveness evidence that may be available to the company. And quite importantly, we do ask that the company does keep us updated with any future plans for licensing, anything that we've put through the process that may be off-label or unlicensed, just so that we kind of like have an idea of future HTA and possible superseding of One Wales advice. And as with any licensed medicines, we also ask the company to make comment on the ESR before it goes to the medicines assessment group. So if we go to the next slide, we've got the final couple of questions for you. So if we go on to the next quiz. Okay, question 1. A commercial arrangement cannot be offered if there's a pre-existing PAS for the licensed product. Is that true or false? Okay, if we go on to the next question now. Okay, a medicine that's being used off-label that subsequently receives a licence will continue to be made available through One Wales. Is that true or false? Okay, I think we can close that one now and move on to the answers. The mixed bag there of responses. Okay. So, sorry, this has turned into a bit of a double negative, really. A commercial arrangement cannot be offered if there is a pre-existing PAS for the licensed product. That's false. In fact, a commercial arrangement can be offered if it's lower than any pre-existing schemes. And if it's attached to the One Wales advice, then any commercial arrangement will be interim and will expire on subsequent receipt of ratification of AWMSG advice or publication of NICE advice. So, and we would look for all future arrangements to be in place on receipt of HTA advice, as would normally be the process. Now, as far as medicines being used off-label that subsequently receive licence will continue to be made available through One Wales. That is false. We would discontinue One Wales on receipt, well, not on receipt of licence. So it's kind of false, but so we would keep it on the One Wales until the HTA had been complete and the HTA advice is available. So there may be a kind of like a grace period of up to 18 months post-license to allow for the submission to HTA and the HTA process to be completed. But it would only be for that sort of very short period of time. It wouldn't be indefinite. So if we go on to the next slide now, and to briefly cover review process. Because of the nature of the One Wales process, obviously levels of evidence, etc., are a lot lower than you would expect to be associated with the HTA process, and so we are looking at evolving evidence or emerging evidence. So we do review it maybe a little bit more stringently or often than HTA advice would be. And initially we look at every One Wales recommendation after 12 months. And so after a 12-month period of it being in place, we'll request new evidence, patient numbers and outcome data from clinicians and or the MA holder, depending on the nature of the advice, whether it's off-label or licensed. And we also do a literature search to look for any newly published evidence since the advice was, or recommendation was made. And we do produce then a review report, which includes, it collates any new evidence that's been published along with patient numbers and outcome data. And this does then go to the One Wales Medicines Assessment Group to have a look at all that information and to make a recommendation as to whether to continue with the One Wales advice or whether there's enough evidence or enough to warrant a reassessment of the original decision, albeit whether that original decision was positive or to not recommend the medicine in question. Once the One Wales Medicines Assessment Group have had looked at the review and made that decision, that then once again goes to the Chief Executive Management Team for endorsement, and the review outcome is then communicated to NHS Wales and the MA holder, and the website is updated. So as far as subsequent reviews, the OMAG team can also decide at this point whether or not the advice needs to be reviewed on an annual basis, or they can in fact extend the review period for up to 3 years post that first review at 12 months. So if it's something that they don't believe is going to change massively in the next couple of years, then they may want to extend the period until the following review. Whereas if they think that maybe there's evidence that a trial is going to become available, or the results of the trial is going to become available, then they may want to stick to the 12-monthly review. And regardless of that time period, AWTTC will always conduct a internal review, so we will do a sense check on an annual basis, looking at any newly licensed alternative treatments, or doing a literature search as well to see if anything significant has come up in the preceding 12 months. So if we go to the final slide now. Okay, there's a page on the One Wales Medicines process on the AWTTC website with all the associated documentation and policy papers, etc. So if you want to have a dig a bit deeper into it, then please go there. And so all I'll say now is thank you for your time, and I'm now going to hand over to Tom Curran, who's going to talk to you about medicines optimization. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. Hi. Hello, thanks, Rosie. So if we can go on to the next slide, please. Thank you very much. So yeah, hello, my name's Tom Curran, and I'm one of the senior scientists working at AWTTC. Specifically, my work is very much focused on the medicines optimization side of AWTTC's outputs, so many of which are submitted by the All Wales Medicine Strategy Group for their endorsement. So next slide, please. So as an overview of what I'm looking to cover in this talk, I'll be giving a brief introduction to the development process for the majority of our medicines optimization projects, and then where you can find out more information about that process. I'll summarize a number of the most recent resources we've published, giving you a sense of the breadth of work we deliver. I'll also touch on the medicines optimization work we have on the horizon and where you can keep track of what we're doing. I'll then be providing an update on the National Prescribing Indicator, or NPI, aspect of our work, followed by a look at another data-focused project, namely the inhaler decarbonisation dashboard work we've recently delivered. So if I have the next slide, please. So before I go through those key points, it's important to clarify what we at AWTTC mean when we refer to medicines optimization. So as defined by the Royal Pharmaceutical Society, medicines optimization is about ensuring that the right patients get the right choice of medicine at the right time. So ultimately, with the goal being to support patients to improve their outcomes, take their medicines correctly, avoid taking unnecessary medicines, and also reduce wastage of medicines, and also improve medicine safety. Next slide, please. So the projects and resources AWTTC helps to develop with a view to supporting medicines optimization throughout Wales can mostly be grouped into the categories presented here. So firstly, we have our prescribing guidelines, probably the majority of what we produce, where we present evidence-based guidance on how a range of conditions may be treated, how medication may be tailored to the individual, and specifically try and address any nuances in the treatment or service that may be specific to the NHS in Wales. A number of these guidelines may also be supported by the production of plain language, easy to understand patient information leaflets, provided in both English and Welsh. And we also produce audit materials designed to provide a toolkit or resource that can easily be applied in practice. So a GP practice, for example, can monitor how their prescribing aligns with the published evidence and national guidance. We also have provided a route for a specific medication charts or records to be endorsed by AWMSG for use on a national level, such as the inpatient medication administration records developed by the All Wales Chief Pharmacist Group. And lastly, we have national prescribing indicators, which I'll discuss in a little bit more detail towards the end, and also prescribing analysis work that feeds into a lot of the work we do, and I'll be again discussing a specific example of that type of work at the end of this talk. Next slide, please. So all the work we do goes through a standard process. This begins with a project proposal, whereby we have a project proposal form available on our website, and project proposals can be submitted by anybody. This includes healthcare professionals, members of the public, and also representatives of the pharmaceutical industry. So these proposals are then considered by an AWTTC management board to ensure that it aligns with any work priorities AWTTC currently has, and that there is a capacity to complete the work. If the work is accepted, it will then proceed as shown on this diagram. There'll be a period of initial development, often taking the resources drafted by the project proposer and developing it into a resource more suitable for use on an all-Wales basis, utilising the breadth of clinical, scientific and editorial expertise we have in AWTTC. When the resource is ready, it will undergo its first consideration by the All Wales Prescribing Advisory Group, or AWPAG. This is a subgroup which advises AWMSG on the strategic developments in prescribing and medicines optimisation, with membership providing a broad representation of the NHS in Wales. At this first consideration by AWPAG, members will decide whether future work is required, further work is required, or if it's appropriate for the document to proceed to consultation. Consultations last for an absolute minimum of 15 working days, though tend to last more 20 working days. They're made openly available on the AWTTC website. They're also disseminated directly to consultees identified by the project lead in AWTTC. Consultation comments are welcome from anybody. So these are healthcare professionals, patients and their carers, members of the public, and again, yourselves as representatives of the pharmaceutical industry. Following consultation, the comments received, any responses from the author are then, and an updated draft of the resource resulting from any recommendations made in the consultation, all that is considered at a second meeting of AWPAG. Should members agree that any concerns raised in consultation have been addressed, they can improve the resource to proceed to AWMSG for endorsement. Now, prior to each monthly meeting of AWMSG, there's a meeting of the steering committee where any papers to be considered by the full committee are confirmed. This also provides an opportunity for the steering committee to highlight any issues or queries that they anticipate may be raised at the full meeting. And then lastly, we have the full AWMSG meeting itself. This will be comprised of the same members who would consider any health technology appraisal going through that group, where the resource will then be considered by the members and confirmed to be appropriate for endorsement, and then ultimately publication on the AWTTC website as soon as possible. So all of what I've covered so far can be explored in more detail in our Medicines Optimization Framework document. This was published last year. You can simply go to our AWTTC website, you can search for the keyword framework, and it should pop up for you. This covers in more depth what medicines optimization means. Sorry, can you go on to the next slide? Sorry. So this covers in more detail what medicines optimization means. It goes into more detail on what resources we produce. It can state how new projects can be proposed and how you can find a proposal form. It also goes into a bit more detail about the development process, gives more detail on the consultation process and how we consider consultation comments, provides a bit of background on how we then review publications after they've been published, and also gives a summary of some of the future work being explored to improve our processes going forward. Have the next slide, please. So next, I wanted to give you a look and overview of some of the most recent medicines optimization projects. So firstly, we have the All Wales Advice on Sodium Glucose Co-Transporter 2, or SGLT2 inhibitors, in type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. This was published in September of last year. This provides a robust literature review of the evidence for SGLT2 inhibitor use in patients with type 2 diabetes in relation to both cardiovascular but also renal outcomes, and provides a range of recommendations related to the role of SGLT2s in people with type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. It also provides a single-page graphical summary of some of the recommendations within the guidance, providing a steer to healthcare professionals on what SGLT2s may be more or less appropriate given a patient's specific characteristics. Have the next slide, please. So the next set of resources I'd like to mention were updated in 2022. These are the All Wales Adult Asthma Prescribing Guideline. originally published in 2020, and the All Wales COPD Management and Prescribing Guideline, which was originally published in 2019. Both of these were originally published to provide clear and concise advice on inhaler prescribing in these two respiratory conditions, with the aim to reduce the variation in inhaler prescribing observed across Wales. In 2021, both of these guidelines were updated to encourage consideration of the decarbonisation agenda of NHS Wales. So this primarily focuses on recommending the preferential prescribing of dry powder inhalers, or DPIs, rather than metered dose inhalers, MDIs, due to the significantly reduced environmental impact associated with their use. And this is also aligned to the overall NHS Wales target of reducing the use of MDIs from more than 70% down to less than 20% by 2025. Where appropriate, we also took the opportunity to list some newly available inhaler options as part of this review. So next slide, please. Thank you very much. So in March of this year, we published a range of antimicrobial resources as well. So the core part of this range was the Primary Care Antimicrobial Guidelines, which provides comprehensive advice on the antimicrobial management of a large range of common infections in primary care. The core part of this range, this guidance takes into account local pathogen and antimicrobial susceptibility data in Wales. The guideline also takes account of all recently published primary care guidelines. This will include organisations such as NICE, Public Health England, the British Association of Sexual Health and HIV. These guidelines were also supported by two further, more focused guidelines on management of C. diff infection in Wales and management of recurrent UTIs in adult women. In addition, audit materials were produced that support clinicians with quality improvement by promoting review of antimicrobial prescribing in their practice and promoting antibiotic prescribing in accordance with existing guidance, so namely the primary care antimicrobial guidelines I just mentioned. These audit materials provide a range of templates ready to use for anyone wishing to carry out these audits. Have the next slide, please. Thank you. We also returned to the Tramadol educational resources package we had produced previously in 2013. The update focused on reviewing the evidence presented in the resource and updating the information to promote appropriate prescribing in the wider context of opioid medicines use in Wales, and also in the treatment of chronic pain conditions in general. Since the resources were first published, the evidence base has also increased to recommend that opioid medicines are now not appropriate for chronic non-cancer pain. The resource also includes a summary of recent prescribing data, links to other useful resources, audit materials and information for patients, with the patient information leaflet specifically due to be updated on the website in the coming days, having been recently endorsed by AWMSG. Have the next slide, please. So lastly, as we do every year, we have continued to produce quarterly analysis reports for our national prescribing indicators. These provide a breakdown of how each health board has performed against each of the indicators and allows comparison of performance between health boards and over time. These reports are published on the website on a quarterly basis, but AWTTC also manage this, what we call the Server for Prescribing Information Reporting and Analysis, or SPIRA, which is an online interactive portal where staff on the NHS Wales network can access the latest data as soon as it's available and even generate their own data visualizations. Have the next slide, please. Thank you. So now on to a view of what's coming up on the horizon. Anyone can view our current programme of work in development by accessing the work in progress area of the AWTTC website. This is visible on the top toolbar throughout the website. This lists current pieces of work, when consultations are expected, and where appropriate, will list what consultations we currently have open. So please do keep an eye on this page. The first item I have listed here, Care Homes Medicine's Optimisation Toolkit, was in fact published on the website in the last 24 hours, which is great. This is a big toolkit of resources and brings together a suite of guidance documents, tools and useful resources for care home staff and pharmacy teams who provide advice and support to care homes. Items that continue to be worked on include the chronic pain resources, which will provide both an All Wales Analgesic Stewardship Guideline and also an All Wales Pain Prescribing Guideline. There's also the value-based prescribing package of work that we're continuing. The overarching strategy for this was recently published, and we're doing more work on rolling in some of our past work, which was entitled Low Value for Prescribing, and also doing new work on new items for inclusion in this programme. We are working on and recently consulted on a revision to our existing guidance on prescribing intervals, explaining the move away from 28-day prescribing as standard towards consideration of longer prescribing intervals where appropriate. We are also updating our polypharmacy guidance with a view for it now to focus more on the elderly population, with advice more tailored towards the polypharmacy that specific patient population is likely to encounter. And lastly, we are in the early stages of developing some clear guidance on understanding unlicensed medicines. This will be to provide guidance on what is meant by the term unlicensed medicines, understanding responsibilities throughout the different stages of the prescribing journey, and key steps to be taken when prescribing or transferring care. The next slide, please. And before I finished, I wanted to go in a little bit more detail on two more things. So firstly is the MPIs themselves. Not only do we produce the quarterly reports of how health boards are performing against each of these indicators, we also facilitate the process that leads to the development and agreement of each successive MPI, each successive set of MPIs. In January 2022, we published the 22-23 set of MPIs endorsed by AWMSG. This publication is also coupled with a couple of supporting information publications, including detailed specifications for how each MPI is measured and monitored, and a summary of resources that may be useful in helping health boards, clusters, practices to achieve the aims of those indicators. As always, the MPIs are used to highlight therapeutic priorities for NHS Wales and compare the ways in which different prescribers and organisations use particular medicines or groups of medicines. As with the prior set of MPIs, the MPIs for 22-23 cover a range of priority areas and supporting domains. Many of these have been continued, but a new priority area of decarbonisation of inhalers has been introduced. In support of the updates to the respiratory guidelines mentioned earlier, this will monitor the number of dry powder inhalers and soft mist inhalers prescribed as a percentage of all the inhalers prescribed in Wales. So this should encourage use of those inhalers with low global warming potential. We've also added an additional measure within the analgesics priority area to focus on the prescribing of high-strength opioids, in addition to the existing indicator we have that looks at the overall opioid burden. Alongside these additions, previous indicators looking at proton pump inhibitor prescribing and long-acting insulin analogues have been retired. However, their data will continue to be monitored and, as I've mentioned before, can be accessed and viewed via the Spira interactive portal that's available to all NHS Wales network users. If I could have the next slide, please. And lastly, I wanted to introduce some of the recent data analysis work we've been delivering in AWTTC. This is focused on decarbonisation. As part of our work programme around sustainability and working towards decarbonisation across NHS Wales, we have produced a data dashboard that allows health boards, clusters and GP practices to analyse their prescribing of inhalers in primary care. They can analyse the carbon footprint associated with their current prescribing patterns and the potential impacts of introducing appropriate switches to inhalers with lower global warming potential. This would include assigning carbon footprint values to the inhalers prescribed in a given period, and also a summary of maybe the cost of prescribing and how that might be changing over time. So the dashboard provides an array of measures and is delivered as part of Spira, which I've already mentioned, and even allows for specific GP practices to monitor their own performance. But obviously this is only accessible to NHS Wales network users. But there's also a snapshot of the primary care data delivered by this tool summarised at an all Wales level, which we publish in monthly reports on our AWTTC website. If you go to the website and search for inhaler carbon footprint, you should be able to see it. So if I have the next slide, please, as I wrap up. So yeah, so hopefully that gives you a broad overview of the kind of things we've been producing, but specifically what we've been doing in the last year or so. But as a summary of what I'd like you to take away from this is, please do explore our resources and share any feedback you may have at any point. You can always submit your project ideas, and the new project proposal form can be found alongside the Medicines Optimization Framework document I mentioned. And also, as you often do get involved in our consultations, but do continue to be involved, as we always value your feedback on the things we produce. So I want to say thank you, diolch. I'll be handing back to Stephen, but I think we'll be then entering the questions phase of today's session. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosie and Tom. Good to have a detailed overview. So I'm not seeing a great deal of questions in the chat. Come on, everybody, this is your moment to shout. If anybody wants to ask a question in person, that is also possible. So feel free to unmute yourself. Just a couple of minutes for you to gather your thoughts. So just a question from me. If I'm really stuck, you know, I've looked at your website and information's not there, perhaps on One Wales. What do I do? How do I get in touch with you guys to get some more information, perhaps get some insight on whether One Wales is appropriate?
Well, I think
so yeah, I'll answer that. Hi everybody, I'm Gail Woodland. I lead the team for One Wales. So if you wanted to find out a little bit more about our process, then obviously email us, and that email will come to the team, and more than happy to discuss anything with individual companies. If we are dealing with an individual company for a One Wales review, then we're happy to meet with them as well to discuss what's needed in terms of the process. So.
Okay, yeah, that's really helpful. We have had a question which is a very brief one. I'd like to ask about the Spire report. We've got a few minutes now. Is now a good time just to talk a little bit about summarise the Spire report?
is that the Spiro report? Was that?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. So Spira is the interactive portal that AWTCC hosts that presents lots of the data linked to NPIs, but also provides a couple of additional dashboards, provides detail on biosimilar use across Wales versus the reference products, for example. And this is openly available to anybody as long as they're accessing through the NHS Wales network. So it lets them drill down to data for their specific health board or cluster, and all the way down to GP practice level. But also we have certain parts of Spira let them generate their own graphs and things. So if you've seen the monthly or the quarterly reports we produce, all the data you see on there is also available on Spira, and sometimes a little bit sooner than maybe it's available in the quarterly reports, because it's sometimes associated with tidying out for publication and things. But as I say, yes, that data currently is only available to users accessing through the NHS network. Just because you can drill down to such detail, it's maybe not appropriate for us to host openly. Hope that helps. Anything else? Any other specific questions on Spira I can answer? Or try and answer?
Jonathan, you've asked some questions, so I can unmute you. Here we go. There you go, Jonathan. Floor is yours.
Yeah, Steve, thanks. And it is. So I asked a question, Tom, about the Spiro report, and you've mentioned it a few times that it is. It's not available to us. I work for AstraZeneca. I work in the respiratory arena. We're all aware that decarbonisation is the hottest possible topic. It would be it would be useful for us. Maybe I'm being selfish. Hopefully, I'm being a little bit more altruistic. That if we were able to see the hot spots at a practice level, or certainly at a cluster level, for high decarbonisation work, we have a number of support items for practices specifically, which could help them to identify their, particularly their high SABA patients, which are the biggest contributors to the carbon footprint. So, is there any likelihood of a reconsideration of the decision to allow us to view it as alongside the NHS?
I don't think that's currently in consideration, though I will say that obviously going into 22-23, when we start reporting on the new set of MPIs, some of that data summarised at a health board level will be published in our quarterly reports for that decarbonisation of inhalers indicator. So hopefully that might give you a steer as to maybe what health boards you might be able to approach with advice and things. But I know Kath's on the call, so she might be able to give more steer, but I don't think it's on the cards maybe to open up, just because of the nature of how far you can drill down with the data. And it's possibly not fair on GP practices to have that more openly monitored. Kath, I don't know if you want to say anything else.
I mean, no, thanks, Tom. I mean, Tom, it's exactly what Tom said. It's correct, Jonathan. I think, as has been mentioned, it will be reported in the quarterly report going forward from the 22-23 indicators. So you will see from a cluster perspective where the hotspots are, then, so to speak. And I suppose it's about contacting the individual health boards if they need to have any support to address any concerns they have locally. So not at the moment. We would not be sharing any detailed GP practice data.
Always worth asking the question, though, isn't it?
Of course it is. Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem.
So we've got 6 minutes left. Any further questions? We have one in the chat from Patrick. How are new guidelines communicated to GPs and clinicians? Sounds a fairly broad question. Any quick answers to that?
So we do have an extensive email stakeholder list that we email directly out to, and we have specific contacts that then send it out to GP practices across Wales and notifying them of the availability of new guidance. We might put notifications on Twitter as well, and obviously all new items are promoted continuously on our website on the front page. So we do our best to promote all our available guidance, but it's something we're constantly working on, trying to reach out more and more effectively.
Perfect, thank you. Let's just open you leave this for another minute or so in case anybody has a burning question to drop in. Now is your opportunity. Go on, be brave. Well, Steph, I think if there's nothing else, I think this might be time to close proceedings. What do you think?
Yeah, thanks everyone, and thanks for the questions that were asked. If anyone's got any follow-ups, then feel free to email AWTTC. It's nice to see people attending, and yeah, spread the word for that session in November, and keep your eyes out for an invitation for that session.
Yes, Steph, can you remind us of the date of that?
We haven't confirmed the date. We've got a few key meetings that month, so we're looking to find a date in a month, mid-November.
Perfect. Well, in that case, everybody, thanks for your time. Good to see you all. Have the most amazing day. It's goodbye from everybody.
Bye-bye.